Hello, I'm Bill Hayes, Managing Editor of the Pennsylvania CPA Journal. Welcome to CPA Conversations, PICPA's podcast series where we'll talk to CPAs and other professionals about pressing matters affecting the accounting industry. In the fall 2021 Pennsylvania CPA Journal, our guest today wrote the federal tax column on his experience working through a private letter ruling with the IRS during the struggles of the coronavirus pandemic. Today, he is with us to discuss exactly what a private letter ruling is, what the process of working on the request was like, developments that took place after his column in the magazine went to press, and more. We're happy to have on the program Barry Grobel, Senior Tax Consultant for Herbine & Company Incorporated in Reading. Barry, thanks for being with us today.
Glad to be here, Bill. Thank you.
Now, as I said in the intro there, the story you did in the fall 2021 Pennsylvania CPA Journal, it revolved around your involvement in an IRS private letter ruling and how it was affected by the pandemic, or at least how it was conducted during the pandemic. So I guess the first question should be, what is an IRS private letter ruling? Want to set up that context, and under what circumstances does it become necessary?
Generally, a private letter ruling is a written opinion from the IRS regarding the federal income tax treatment of a proposed transaction that someone's going to be doing, the federal tax law treatment of an accounting process. Our firm has been through that with some cooperative clients that we do. Or in the case of this immediate taxpayer that was the subject of my article, getting relief for missing a deadline for filing a federal tax extension.
Is it a rare thing for a CPA to become involved in a private letter ruling? Obviously, you've had an esteemed CPA career, and it's the first one you were involved in, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's not common for most CPAs to prepare a private letter ruling request. Since there's a filing fee that you have to pay with the IRS that is not insubstantial, it's over $10,000 in the case of my taxpayer. Plus, there could be considerable professional fees from either a CPA preparing and reviewing or an attorney being involved. That cost can get up pretty high. So because of the substantial cost, you generally see private letter rulings being prepared by either big four firms or larger firms where their clients have more of an income tax, the larger income tax exposure at stake there. Yeah. So the larger the client, the larger the firm, that's when it's more often done.
What was the issue in this case? And can you describe some of the process you went through in fulfilling this request? I know it was a detailed one.
Our private letter ruling was a request for relief from missing a deadline for making a federal tax election. And it's interesting because, several years ago, when I was working on some other situation, and I was actually talking to someone from a big four firm. They talked about this process of requesting an extension of an election, and he sort of compared it to getting root canal. He said it's a really difficult process because you have to go through it. So it's available under Code Section 9100, and in our case, the taxpayer asserted that they had relied on their accountant to file the necessary election, and that the missed election deadline was due to failure of the accountant to properly advise them of the process. So what we had to do is we had to get affidavits from all the involved parties, including all the owners of the business, their CFO, and actually the former accountant gave us an affidavit sort of explaining that, there was a lack of miscommunication, and as a result of that, the election was missed. And we also explained, you have to explain that there's no other way that the taxpayer could get relief from this, and in our situation there wasn't. And also you have to prove or assert that the government's interests are not jeopardized in any way. For instance, like the government, by the government granting this extension of election, they wouldn't lose significant tax revenue. And that was actually the case in our situation too.
I know, as we talked about, this process was, I guess, a bit extended. I want to say in your case, but maybe this is something that happens all the time. What do you think the reason was for the delay, if it was one? And is the IRS simply overloaded at this time, or maybe, as I alluded to, is this sort of standard procedure from your knowledge?
Yeah, I was aware going in and talking to other CPAs that I knew that did these, that the process could take anywhere from 6 to 12 months, even in normal circumstances. But I think the biggest delay in our case was there was a question about whether the taxpayer had received certain notices from the IRS. So we attempted to obtain a tax transcript from the IRS, and this occurred mostly during 2020 at the height of the pandemic. So there's a fax number that you can use because you really can't call anybody. No one's in the office, and we didn't want to take the chance of sending something in the mail. So I made numerous attempts to fax this transcript request to the IRS during the summer of 2020, and it never went through on their end. So finally, we consulted with all parties involved and said, well, let's just mail something in. So we mailed in the transcript request probably in May or June. And then finally in like October or November, we got a response back that, oh, we got your transcript request and the signature was wrong, so we can't process it. So that was really annoying. And then what we did at that point, we said, you know what, we're not going to worry about this anymore. We're going to proceed. And one thing we did to proceed, which took a little bit of time too, was the attorney we were consulting with on this said that you can sometimes call the IRS attorney who may be reviewing the ruling request ultimately and get a feel for if they think it would work, because you don't want to spend $10,000 filing fee if you know it's not going to work. So I was able to go to this IRS directory that you can find online and sort of narrow down the attorney's name that I think might be involved with this private loan ruling. And I was able to call and actually get that person on the phone. I think they had probably working remotely, but they had access to either their phones are being rerouted to them or whatever. And she was very helpful initially. She said, oh, I think this sounds like it's a similar, sort of a familiar case. I'll follow up and get back to you. But then like months later, I mean, we probably had that discussion in October, and I kept on calling and following up. And then finally in early January, she said, oh, yeah, I'm sorry for not getting back to you. I talked to my supervisor, and I think we would accept this PLR request. So that's whenever in January of 2021, we finally filed this. And you can tell from when you see my article, you see we started this process initially in like March of 2019. So it was, March of 2020. So it's quite a long process until we got it filed. And then now we were in the wait and see situation. So it did take until probably about 6 months before someone eventually got back to us with a couple follow-up questions. And then we recently got approval. So
the next two questions will be pretty interesting because it almost speaks to sort of the vagaries of the magazine process in some respect. But you had gotten a resolution before the magazine went to print, and then you got some after the magazine went to print. So we'll handle those one at a time. I mean, as we're going to print on the fall 2021 Pennsylvania CPA Journal, you got what I believe was positive news in relation to this request. And am I right about that?
You are right. What I did was I got a phone message, a voicemail message from the attorney involved, telling me the good news that our request had been approved and that we would be getting written confirmation of that soon. So that was good news. It was just verbal. I really wanted to get something written in my hand, but the verbal approval was very positive.
Yeah, so then there were some subsequent developments, right, after we had finalized the magazine. So is the matter at a close at this point? What's the status?
Yeah, it looks good. Well, what happened was that inexplicably to me, because we would fax items to the IRS all the time related to this ruling request. We didn't have such good luck on the transcript request, but whenever the attorney would ask for information, I would fax it to him. He would confirm that he got it, and that was fine. And our firm, like a lot of other firms these days, send their faxes through their computers. It's an e-fax system, so we don't have a whole lot of those old standard standalone fax machines.
Yeah.
So we had given those fax numbers to the IRS, and he called me and said, this processing section of the IRS can't get through on these fax numbers. I said, really? I said, well, let me test. So I had my IT department test, and I tested it myself, and I got back to him and said, it's working on our end. Maybe it's something on your end. And they said, well, then he asked the question, is it one of these e-fax systems or is it a standalone fax? And I said, no, it's an e-fax system. So we finally had to determine there was a copier in our office that also is a standalone fax machine. So we had them fax the documents there, and that was successful.
Yeah.
And then after we received them, we sent them around to all the parties on our team, the client, the attorney who was advising us, and one of my colleagues who was working on this client, and said, here's the approval letter. We have to answer a question about whether or not. What they do is the PLR requests eventually are published, and they can be used by accountants, not as a substantial authority, but it gives you an idea of where the IRS is headed on this. So when they publish them, they redact all the sensitive names. So they delete, the client's name, some of the facts. So one of the things in the ruling request approval letter is that, look at the redacted copy and make sure you agree with the deletions. If you don't, let us know within 30 days or something like that.
Yeah.
So we had everybody read the document to see if they were okay with that. And then my colleague got back to me and said, yeah, I'm okay with all that. He said, there's a mistake in the facts. And I said, really? And what the issue was is that it was what type of election was filed that deadline was missed. The IRS got it right in the conclusion and granted us the relief for the right election that we made. But in the statement of facts, they stated the wrong election. Okay. So I called the IRS back and I said, I'm sorry, but I think that the statement of facts is wrong. And I don't think it affects the conclusion, but since this might be published, do you think we should probably correct that? And he agreed. So they went through the whole process again, corrected it, and faxed it to us again. And now we have the corrected, approved one, and everybody has that. Now, the only next step is that what our request gave us was the ability to file this election late. So we now need to actually file the election, and we're in the process of doing that. And once that's done, the whole process will be over.
Interesting. This is obviously a very involved process. What would be your advice? As we talked about, it's pretty rare for CPAs to get involved, but what would be your advice to a CPA who's asked to work on a private letter ruling for the first time? What would you have them do?
What I did was, I sort of had a sense of this, but then I was directed to this by one of my CPA colleagues that I know who's done one before in another firm, is that every year the IRS publishes a revenue procedure, sort of a blueprint about how to do private letter rulings. It's a fairly voluminous document. It's probably over 100 pages long, and it's always published in early January. Yeah. So what you can do is you go get this document, and it even has, which was helpful for me, it even has a suggested format of what the letter should look like. They have a sample letter in there, and you can sort of just see what it's supposed to look like. There's a checklist that you have to fill out when you submit, and it also goes through this whole list of all the possible filing fees you have to pay. So that's one thing that's really helpful. One thing that was interesting in our case is that, we started the process in March of 2020. So I was referring to the 2020 revenue procedure for this. And then we finished the process in January of 2021. So I had to update our letter ruling for some of the changes that had come out in the 2021 revenue ruling. And the other thing I would suggest is that if you're lucky enough to have or know another CPA who's done one of these, or an attorney that has done one, it's good to get that kind of consultation, either to have them provide advice or maybe do a review of the document before you send it in. That's really helpful. And also, I think it's important, because of the filing fees, to be mindful of those, because they increase almost every year. So in our situation, they sent out the schedule of filing fees for this type of a ruling request, and they were going to go up in February. So we sort of made sure we got ours in before the end of January to avoid the higher filing fee.
Yeah.
And then the other thing too is, if it's possible to do what we did with contacting someone from the IRS, an attorney beforehand, to sort of get a feel if your ruling request has any chance of being successful or not. And I think I alluded to possibly in the article that in the CPA Journal, there's how to find this list of attorneys, and it's not easy to find, but if you poke around on the internet a little bit, you can find it. And it's broken down either by code section or type of issue. Like ours was, accounting method changes. So we were able to call someone with that under that system, and you actually talk to a real person who's knowledgeable in the area.
Excellent. Well, Barry, thanks for joining us today and certainly sharing your experience with our audience. And I also want to thank you for writing the piece in the Fall 2021 Pennsylvania CPA Journal. At this point, the piece is already up on the PICPA website. You can check it out at www.picpa.org/journal. It should also have arrived to our members' preferred addresses, or it will be coming any day now, pretty much at this point, feel free to check out not only Barry's column, but features on the evolution of the office environment, business interruption claims due to COVID, sections on our Young Leaders and PICPA Women to Watch Award winners, and much, much more. So again, Barry, thanks for being here with us today. And it's on vacation, really. So we're even more thankful that you were able to join us.
Glad to do it. Really, really like this PICPA and glad to help out. As
usual, we want to remind you that we have an extensive library of CPA conversations. Check them out at www.picpa.org/conversations, or make it easy on yourself by subscribing wherever you get podcasts. And of course, make sure to pass along your ideas for podcasts to content@picpa.org. One more thing, if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to rate us so other CPAs can find us. Talk to you later, everybody.